Hello good people of YouTube, and welcome to my hobby channel, and this the second video where I take a look at miniatures from other manufacturers and I ask the question, are these any good for kit bashing and will they make decent proxy Empire troops? Now at the moment I'm focusing on Cavalry, and in the first video in this particular series I took a look at the Renaissance Heavy Cavalry and Conquistador Cavalry from Wargames Atlantic. So please check it out if you haven't seen it already. Last year, whilst building my Bretonian army, I did take a look at the Sergeant at Arms and the Mounted Sergeants, so I'm not going to go over old ground too much. First thing I wanted to do is look at the Northmen Cavalry. 2 sprues of bases. Command sprue. There are 2 sprues that contain heads, torsos and legs, 2 identical sprues of horses. Before I get on with building the horses, I wanted to have a quick look at the heads. There's 5 different designs there. Some of those will probably look rather good mixed in with my Empire State troops. So that was the Northmen Cavalry, and we'll return to build the horses when I've had a look at the Byzantine horse archers. And here they are. 2 sprues of bases, 2 sprues of Byzantine horse archers, and that leaves 4 sprues of horses. Let's start with 1 horse from the Northmen Cavalry. Okay, so that's 1 horse from the Northmen Cavalry. Right, so I've got a couple of bases there that I've salvaged. Lightly tack these horses to. Whilst I wait for these horses to dry, I shall build a couple of riders from the Conquistador Cavalry and the Renaissance Heavy Cavalry, and I'll also put together an Empire Knight and a Pistolier, and we will do some scale comparisons. Whilst making these videos, I have spent a bit of time casting my eye over the horse from the Empire Knights box and the horse from the Pistolier's box. I'm pretty convinced that the issue is actually the length of the legs on the horses. I think there's a difference in height of perhaps 5 millimeters, and that is why these beautiful horses from 1991 look small in comparison to the Pistolier's horse. After spending some time last night beavering away, building riders, I've now got a selection of different options in front of me which we can take a look at. We've got Bronzino from the Gallopagun Dogs of War, and the horse that he's riding is the standard horse that Games Workshop were using at the same time that they produced the Empire Knights horse in Barding that we can see in the middle. And then on the far right there we've got the Empire Pistoliers or Outriders horse, which we've already established is quite large, and I think that is down to the legs. Personally, I think I'm going to get round, personally I think I'm going to make the Empire Knights horse look a little bit taller simply by raising the ground level on the base, elevating the horse by a few millimeters. To my eye that seems to work. But anyway, let's take a look at some of the horses and riders from other manufacturers. This is what a Wargames Atlantic horse looks like when you add the barding, the horse head that comes in the Renaissance Heavy Cavalry box. And this is a rider built straight from the box. One thing I did notice with these models was that the heads seem a little on the small side, and if you're building an army for 25 or 28 mil historical war games, then that won't be a problem. In fact, that's desirable. But if we're comparing the rider to a Pistolier from Games Workshop, then as you can see, there is a noticeable difference in size. And that's what a Renaissance Heavy Cavalry rider looks like on a Games Workshop Pistolier's horse. A little on the small side, but if you wanted a model that looked like it was riding a Shire horse, then maybe that's a solution. And here on the left we've got Renaissance Heavy Cavalry from Wargames Atlantic, built straight out of the box. And on the right, we've got a Games Workshop Empire Pistolier sitting on a Wargames Atlantic horse. If we bring in an Empire Knight, the size discrepancy between the rider and the horse for the Pistoliers is probably a little less obvious. Now, what I've done here is build a Renaissance heavy cavalryman straight out the box, which we can see on the right hand side. But on the left hand side, I've built a Wargames Atlantic Conquistador cavalryman, and I've done a head swap. The head on the left is from FireForge Northman Cavalry, and it is slightly bigger than the heads that come with the Wargames Atlantic Conquistadors or Renaissance Heavy Cavalry. And to my eye, that makes the Conquistador on the left look more like an old Warhammer miniature, perhaps one of the old Hammer miniatures that was sculpted by the Perrys. I quite like the look of that Conquistador. So for me, that is a possible option. There we can see him mounted on a Pistolier's horse. If you're lucky enough to have some old school or old Hammer Games Workshop plastic horses, like the horse on the right here from Bronzino's Galloper gun, then you could always mount your Wargames Atlantic Conquistadors or Heavy Cavalry on an old GW horse and create something that fits very well with Empire Knights. And although the saddle would need trimming down, I think it's interesting to see the Renaissance Heavy Cavalry rider on a FireForge Dustvault medieval Sergeant at Arms horse. The horse is a little on the small side, but for anyone who's interested in using plastic historical figures to create fantasy armies, this is actually quite an interesting combination. Something else I wanted to show you was the Games Workshop Pistolier mounted on a Wargames Atlantic Renaissance Heavy Cavalry horse with all the barding and armour in place. Continuing with the theme of head swaps, I just wanted to do a quick lineup. On the left, we've got Bronzino. Then moving from left to right, we've got a Wargames Atlantic Heavy Cavalry built straight from the box. Wargames Atlantic Conquistador with a Northmen Cavalry rider's head. Next to him, we've got a Wargames Atlantic Conquistador with a head from the Ghost Archipelago Crewmen box. And second from the right, we've got a Conquistador with an Outrider's head from Games Workshop. And finally, on the extreme right, we've got the Pistolier. If we zoom in for a closer look, hopefully you can see that as we increase the size of the head that we're putting on the riders, the Conquistadors, then we tend to get a figure that looks slightly more heroic in scale, even if the hands and the feet are smaller. Here and in the middle, I'm using a horse from the FireForge Northmen Cavalry. And on top of the Heavy Cavalryman from Wargames Atlantic, I've put the head from the Ghost Archipelago Crewman. If we swap out the rider for one that has a Pistolier or Outrider's head, again, that kind of bumps up the impression of scale a little bit, so that when we look at the miniature in the middle, we appear to have a figure that is heroic scale, riding a horse that looks much smaller. And by swapping out the horse and using a model from the Byzantine Horse Archers box, we get a slightly different look again. Although I think personally I do quite like the Wargames Atlantic Conquistadors on an old school GW horse with an Outrider's head, which makes the rider look slightly more heroic in size. I've also built a couple of the Warhounds, which I think are great. And I do like the way they look around the feet of the horses, whether I base them separately or put them on an Outrider's base. I don't know. So there we have my quick experiment with a few of the Conquistador cavalry riders and some different heads. I'm not actually sure how I feel about it, because personally I think the models are a little on the small side, and I probably won't be using them for any of my Empire troops. And when it comes to finding an alternative horse for my Pistoliers, Outriders or Road Wardens, the only alternative that I really like is the old Games Workshop horse that came with Bronzino's Galloper gun. I will probably attempt to sculpt a few horses that match the size and scale of this horse that I can then use to replace the larger horse that comes with the Pistoliers and Outriders. In terms of the scale difference between the Pistoliers and the Empire Knights, I think the easiest fix, as I've said before, is just to elevate the Empire Knight's horse on its base by a couple of mil, and I'll do that by gluing the horse to the top of the base rather than inserting the tabs into the slots, and create the illusion that both horses are the same size. In terms of the models that I've been playing around with, I think if your Warhammer collection is based mostly on old school miniatures, old Hammer miniatures from the early 90s perhaps, or even older Citadel miniatures that you can still get from Foundry, and you're looking for a cheap alternative to metals, then the Conquistadors and Renaissance Heavy Cavalry from Wargames Atlantic are certainly an excellent buy. I'm not a big fan of ornate helmets and fancy feathers, so when it comes to my Empire Knights, I'll probably have a look at swapping out some heads, and that will be the extent of my kit bashing with the Empire Cavalry. Now, I am tempted to create an alternative Empire army using historical miniatures, which I will base up for rules like Nevermind the Billhooks or Black Powder. I've got several medieval army projects on the go, and one thing that I've wanted to do is embellish those with some fantasy miniatures so that we can have historical war games with a little bit of something extra. And if we have a look at this Griffin model from Reaper Miniatures, you can see what I'm talking about. The scale of this is very old school. I think this would look great as part of a Landsknecht or Conquistador army, something that was painted up to look realistic, to look historical, and then had one or two of these fantasy creatures mixed in with it. So that's another project that I've got on a slow burn in the background. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please smash that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.